In the previous video, we covered the first sutra of the Yogasutram, Atha Yoga Anushasanam. Now begins the discipline of yoga. We learnt the meanings of the words Atha Yoga and Anushasanam. In the second sutra of the Samadhipada, Patanjali defines the word yoga itself. After all, yoga is the main subject of the Yogasutram.
Shri Dharmananda Guru Charana Kamalebhyo Namaha.
Presenting the Yogasutram of Maharishi Patanjali with the commentary of Maharishi Vyasa, translated and presented by Kuldip Dhiman.
Yogena cittasya padena vacha malam sharirasya cha vaidyakena yopakarottam pravaram munina Patanjali pranjaliranatosmi
Defining yoga, Patanjali says yogaścittavṛttinirodhaḥ. Yoga citta vritti nirodhaḥ. Yoga is the cessation of mental sensations. The word yoga has several meanings. However, in popular usage, yoga means integration. In the present context, the word yoga means the integration of the individual self with the supreme self or with the universal self. The next word is citta. It's again a technical word used in the Sankhya and Yoga system. Citta means a complex consisting of the intellect, the ego, and the mind. It's also called antahkarana. Antah means internal and karana means an organ, a sense organ. So, antahkarana means the internal sense organ. To keep it simple, we might call it citta or manaḥ. The next word is vritti, which means sensation, vibration. When our mind comes in contact with external objects, those objects create impressions or sensations or vibrations on the mind. These are called vrittis. Vrittis can be pleasing, they can also be disturbing. Either way, they create sensations on the mind. And then we have the word nirodha, which means cessation. Yogaścittavṛttinirodhaḥ. Yoga is the cessation of mental sensations. Let's see how Vyasa elaborates upon this sutra. Sarvashabdagrahanaat sampragyatopi yoga ityakhyayate. As the word sarva, which means all, has not been used in this sutra, sampragyata samadhi, object directed samadhi, is also included in yoga. This is the most important sutra of the Yogasutram. In it, Patanjali states the problem of his treatise and also gives solutions to it. The problem to solve is the ever-pulsating mind in response to external stimuli, and the solution is the cessation of the pulsation of the mind, not the cessation of external stimuli that are causing it. There are millions of things out there that disturb the mind's equilibrium. Some can possibly be removed, but not all. And even those that we manage to remove cannot be removed from our memory. In fact, when we try to remove something from our memory, it gets more entrenched into it. In this sutra, Patanjali introduces the most important terms of the Yogasutram. The terms are yoga, citta, vritti and nirodha. We have gained some idea of yoga. Let's try to understand the word citta now, because the main aim of the Yogasutram is to quieten the disturbed mind. And to do so, we have to first understand what mind or citta is. It's very important to understand the mind and its workings, because although we use the word mind frequently in our lives, we have no clear idea about what mind is and how it works. The problem is we have wrong ideas about it. In the West, the mind was either equated with the soul or with the body. In recent times, it was Wilhelm Wundt who first made efforts to establish psychology as a science. Psychology is the study of mind. Later, Sigmund Freud came up with his theory of psychoanalysis. He said something that shocked the modern world. According to him, our lives were controlled by the unconscious mind. The behaviorists led by Ivan Petrovich Pavlov and James B. Watson disregarded the mind altogether and studied only physical behavior in terms of stimulus and response. Some materialist philosophers and scientists accept the mind, but only as an epiphenomena, a byproduct of the physical and electrochemical processes of the brain. Indian philosophical systems have also deeply thought about the mind. However, these systems do not often agree with each other. As our subject is yoga, we shall very briefly see what mind is in yogic terms. We shall discuss other Indian systems when the context comes up. According to Sankhya Yoga, whatever within us that gets attracted to external objects and gets affected by them is called citta or mind. Yoga also calls it antahkarana, the inner sense organ, which is a complex of the intellect, ego, and the mind. The word for intellect is buddhi or mahat. The Sanskrit word for ego is ahankara, and the word for the mind is manaḥ or citta. We can understand the mind better with the help of this chart that shows the relationship between the 25 elements that make up the entire cosmos. On the left is the Purusha. The Purusha is conscious, intelligent, and absolute. On the right is Prakriti, the dynamic aspect of Purusha. Prakriti creates the phenomenal cosmos through its three gunas or forces: Sattva, Raja, and Tama. When the universe begins, the first thing that emerges is mahat or buddhi, the primordial intellect. It's the intellect which has the power to make decisions. The second evolute of Prakriti is Ahankara, the primordial ego. Ahankara is the common feeling of selfhood that we all have. Ahankara allows us to make claims such as "this is mine, this is not mine." Ahankara is of three types: Sattvic Ahankara, Rajasic Ahankara, and Tamasic Ahankara. From Sattvic Ahankara, the mind, the five senses, that's eyes, ears, nose, tongue, and skin, are born. From Rajasic Ahankara, the five organs of actions, hands, feet, tongue, the genitals, and the anus, are created. From Tamasic Ahankara are born the five Tanmatras, the subtle elements: sound, touch, form, taste, and smell. And from these five are born the five Mahabhutas, or the five gross elements: space, air, fire, water, and earth. The mahat, ahankara, and manaḥ are collectively called antahkarana, the inner sense organ. In the Yogavartikam, Vijnana Bhikshu calls it antahkarana samanyam. Although we cognize the physical things through the sense organs, it's the mind that reacts to the external sensory information provided through the senses. Let's take up the mind first. We perceive the external world through the five senses, but it's not the five senses that perceive the world. If it were the senses that perceive things, then eyes would see even when we were asleep. A dead body has all the five senses, but it perceives nothing. The senses do not perceive. They are just windows or golakas to the external world. There must be something behind these sense organs that understands and organizes the input provided by the senses. Otherwise, there would be a big problem. Suppose you are listening to a person. Your eyes are seeing the person, your ears are hearing what the person is saying, and if there's a flower in the person's hand, your nose is sensing its smell. The eyes can only see, they cannot smell or hear. Likewise, the ears can only hear, they cannot see or smell anything. And the same applies to the other sense organs. Each organ has a special role to play. Thus, in the present case, your ears don't know what your eyes are seeing. and your eyes don't know what the ears are hearing. If this is the case, how do you know that the person whom your eyes are seeing is the same whose voice your ears are hearing? If there weren't any unifying inner organ to connect these different stimuli, we would not have any knowledge of what was happening in front of us. Therefore, there must be some coordinating system between the sense organs to make sense of the information provided by them. That processing system is called citta or mind. Without the mind, all the external stimuli provided by the senses would become useless. This is not merely theoretical. We experience this in our lives daily. Let's imagine a woman in a restaurant. So many things are happening in the restaurant. People are dining, chatting, there is some music too. However, if the woman is worrying and thinking about something at home, she will not hear the sounds and music even if her ears are perfect. She is eating her favorite food but is missing out on the taste. This is because her mind is elsewhere. It's preoccupied with something very serious. Thus, the mind is very important in experiencing things. However, the mind depends on external things to give us an experience of them. It must be noted that the mind can give us an experience even in the absence of things. It's quite possible that this woman is worrying about something that's not there at all. In other words, whether the stimuli are real or imaginary, they do create sensations in the mind. Antahakarana, the internal organ, consists of three things: mahat, the intellect; ahankara, the ego; and mana, the mind. Among these, the mahat is the deciding factor. The mind processes different stimuli, but the intellect is the one that finally helps us conclude. For example, we are seeing something in very low light. What we are seeing sometimes looks like a human figure and sometimes like a tree stump. We are confused and are not sure what it is. In this case, it's the intellect that will make us finally decide whether it's a human or a tree trunk. Then there is ahankara, the ego. It's the one that makes claims. Now we come to citta or manaḥ, the mind. As mentioned, the mind is the one that interacts with the external world. It perceives things and gives us options, vikalpas. While we are talking about the mind, we shall briefly discuss what the Kshanikvada Buddhists say about the mind. At the moment, we'll discuss only the Kshanikvada Buddhists because Vyasa criticizes their views later in his commentary. Kshanikvada means the doctrine of momentariness. According to Kshanikvadi Buddhists, each person's mind is momentary, which means it appears for a fraction of a second and then disappears forever. It's then replaced by a totally unconnected new momentary mind, which again exists only for a fraction of a second and then disappears forever. It's also replaced by another totally different momentary mind, and so on and so forth. This keeps happening all our lives. Not just this, we have innumerable momentary minds. For example, if we are walking through a forest, we would have one momentary mind for everything in the forest. There would be one momentary mind for each tree, for each stone, for each cloud, for each bird, for each animal. In contrast to the Kshanikvadi Buddhist contention, Vyasa says we have only one mind all our lives. It keeps changing, no doubt, but we have only one mind. Let's follow Vyasa's argument. Chittam hi prakhya pravritti sthiti shilatvat trigunam. Being luminous, energetic and lethargic, the mind is said to possess the three gunas. The three gunas are sattva guna, raja guna and tama guna. These are the three forces of Prakriti. Describing their nature, Vyasa says, Prakhya-rupam hi chitta sattvam rajastamobhyam sansrishtameshwarya vishaya-priyam bhavati. Although the mind is predominantly luminous, it gets attracted to worldly objects under the influence of Raja and Tamagunas. Tadeva tamasanuviddhama dharma jnana vairagyaneshwaryopagam bhavati. When dominated by Tamaguna, the mind gets colored by unrighteousness, false knowledge, non-dispassion and ungodliness. Tadeva prakshina mohavaranam sarvatah pradyotamanam anuviddham rajomatraya dharma jnana vairagyaishwaryopagam bhavati. And when the mind becomes free of delusion, it shines with an increase of Rajaguna. Then it moves towards righteousness, self-knowledge, dispassion and godliness. In this passage, Vyasa describes the characteristics of Sattva, Raja and Tamagunas, the three forces that run the entire universe. He says, Sattva Guna is luminous, and the word he uses for it is prakhya, which means luminosity. In the Vedic texts, knowledge is generally equated with luminosity. As Sattva Guna dispels the darkness of ignorance, it's described as prakhya rupam, luminous. Rajaguna being dynamic, it is associated with energy and motion. Tamaguna, on the other hand, is seen as inertia, inactivity and ignorance. So, it's often associated with lethargy and negativity. Sattva, Raja and Tamagunas are represented by the colors white, red and black respectively. Tadeva rajolesha malapetam Swarupa pratishtham sattva purushanyata khyati matram dharmamega dhyanopagam bhavati. And when the mind becomes free of even a slight tinge of Rajaguna, it attains its original blissful nature. At that time, it knows the difference between the buddhi and the purusha, the absolute self. Then it experiences dharmamega samadhi. Tatparam prasankhyanam chakshate dhyayinah. Those who have experienced the ultimate truth call it prasankhyanam, the ultimate knowledge. Dharmamega samadhi means a state in which the yogi attains ultimate knowledge in a deep state of meditation. Most of us take the body-mind complex to be the Atma or the Self. But during Dharmamega Samadhi, the yogi clearly knows that the mind-body complex and the Atma are different things. Vyasa uses the terms Dharmamega Samadhi and Viveka Khyati interchangeably. He now explains the difference between Viveka Khyati and Chitti Shakti or the Atma. Chitti or Chit is another name for the absolute conscious Purusha or Atma. Chiti Shakti aparinami apratisankrama darshita vishaya shuddha chananta cha. Chiti Shakti, the conscious power, is unchanging and is free of all dualities. It's the witness of what the mind cognizes. It's free of the influence of the three gunas and it's pure and infinite. Vyasa says the opposite of Chiti Shakti is Viveka Khyati, also known as Dharmameg Samadhi. A samadhi that's attained by focusing on some object. So, what's Viveka Khyati? Sattvagunatmika chemato viparita Viveka Khyati riti. And as Viveka Khyati is predominated by Sattvaguna, it's the opposite of Chiti Shakti. Ataha tasyam viraktam chittam tamapi khyatim nirunadhi. But when dispassion arises towards even Viveka Khyati is also transcended. Tadavastham chittam sanskaropagam bhavati. And in that state of samadhi, the mind exists as an impression only. Sa nirbijah samadhi. That state is called nirbija samadhi, seedless samadhi. That is samadhi in which karmas do not produce any results. Na tatra kinchit sampragyayata iti asampragyatah. In asampragyata samadhi, there is no experience of the phenomenal world. Hence it's called asampragyata samadhi, object-free samadhi. We might ask, when Sattvaguna predominates in a state of Viveka Khyati, which according to those who know the truth is a high state of self-knowledge, why is it necessary to transcend it? After all, it's a very blissful state. The answer is that although it's a very delightful state, Sampragyat Samadhi depends upon at least one object. So long as the mind is tied to an object, even a desirable object, it cannot be called totally free. The mind will get affected even by that one object and sensations will be created. For example, even a single hole in a boat can sink it sooner or later. According to yoga, even good sensations are disturbances and they also create bondage. A cage made of gold is still a cage. That's the reason even Sattvaguna ought to be transcended. Vyasa concludes by saying, Dvividaha sa yogaścittavṛttinirodhaḥ iti. Thus, the cessation of mental sensation is of two types, sampragyat and asampragyat, object directed and object free. As a prologue to the next sutra, Vyasa wonders what yogis experience in a state that is totally free of objects. Tadavasthe chetasi vishayabhavat buddhi-bodhatma purushah kim svabhava iti. As there are no objects in asampragyat samadhi, what kind of nature does the conscious witnessing individual have? Let's recapitulate what we learned in this video. We first learned the definition of yoga. Yogasuttam. Yoga is the cessation of mental sensations. We learned that the word Purusha means the absolute conscious power behind the universe. It's also called citta and atma. We discussed Prakriti, the dynamic power behind everything in the universe. We also discussed the three gunas of Prakriti, Sattva, Raja and Tama. Raja is movement, Tama is inertia and Sattva is balance and purity. We learned that buddhi or mahat is the primordial intellect. It's the deciding factor behind our choices. Ahankara is the primordial ego. It gives us a sense of selfhood. Then we discussed citta or manaḥ, the mind. Its job is to think of options. We should be clear about two similar sounding words, citta and citta. Citta means the mind and citta means Atma, the universal, conscious, absolute self. Then we learned about vrittis or sensations that are created upon the mind by external objects. We also learned the word nirodha, which means cessation. But we must remember it does not mean suppression. Then we learnt about two types of samadhis, sampragyata and asampragyata. When we withdraw our mind from all objects and focus it on just one object, that state is called sampragyata samadhi, object directed samadhi. And when we free our mind even of that one object, that state is called asampragyata samadhi, object free samadhi. Yogena chittasya padena vacha alam sharirasya cha vaidyakena yopakarotam pravaram munina Patanjali Pranjali Ranatosmi